There are those who say that the weakest issue for the Republican Party today is the issue of abortion, but I'm here to tell you that's incorrect. I'm here to tell you that the worst issue for the Republican Party is healthcare. Because for all their virtue signaling about their desire to make America healthy again, as RFK says, they have nothing to offer on healthcare. They know it, they have given up, they've waved the white flag. At least they have something to gesture at, something to grandstand about with abortion. They say they want to save lives, save the babies. But healthcare, they've got nothing to offer. They've got nothing to offer except screeching about socialism, screeching that any attempts to make healthcare more accessible to people of lower incomes is socialism, is communism, is straight out of Cuba or Venezuela or the Soviet Union. You don't want to be like Joseph Stalin and give people healthcare. You don't want to do that. That's all they have to offer, just fear-mongering. They won't entertain any sort of plan that will help people get healthcare. It is insane. So yeah, we're in a whole different spot from what we were 15, 14 years ago. When remember how the Republicans and the Tea Party riled up their base about the Affordable Care Act. Think about how far we've come from then. They riled them up. They got them to turn out in the November 2010 midterm elections. As Obama put it, the Democrats took a shellacking, and a lot of people attributed that to anger, to resentment over the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And now Obamacare has been the law of the land for 15 years or so. People take it for granted. They're like, yeah, whatever. My pre-existing conditions are covered. There was the Medicaid expansion, which was accepted by most states. There was the individual mandate, which was quite a bit more controversial than some of the other parts of the bill. But yeah, everyone's like, okay, that's totally fine. Even Trump right now has not necessarily repealed it. He's talking about repealing it. He's talking about doing these Medicaid cuts. Well, he's not talking about doing Medicaid cuts in the big, beautiful bill, but the big, beautiful bill does have Medicaid cuts. That is on the table. So yeah, they're trying to avoid saying the quiet part out loud the best they can, but they have nothing to offer in terms of a good healthcare plan. They only criticize Democrats and say, oh, you can't give everyone healthcare because that's socialism. They say, oh, that's going to make healthcare more expensive. That's going to take away people's freedom to get screwed over and go bankrupt on the private market in this country. Oh no, so terrible. The insurance companies, think about the insurance companies. That's the unspoken part of what they're saying. So yeah, they have nothing. They have nothing but pearl clutching about socialism and communism when it comes to healthcare. Well, I'm sorry to say, Republicans, but your time has come. You are not going to be winning on any of these types of cuts to Medicaid, to Medicare. You're not going to win in the battle of ideas. You have already lost. The days of 2010 are over. People no longer buy the hoax about these death panels and the Affordable Care Act and all this nonsense. I think Sarah Palin said that the Affordable Care Act would usher in death panels. Yeah, they screeched about the individual mandate. They said, oh yeah, it's holding a gun to people's head and forcing them to buy healthcare. It's terrible. And it's like, okay, well, it's the law of the land, and it didn't drastically change the US healthcare system. In fact, if anything, that's more of a capitalist idea because it's saying go to the private market and buy health insurance. It's saying, hey, don't mooch off the system by not buying health insurance and making it more expensive. Go buy health insurance so that it will make it more affordable for other people. So yeah, they have nothing. They have nothing on healthcare. Isn't that something? And it's sort of like, I wish that the Democrats had better messaging on immigration, because the Democrats sort of seem like they're going in the same direction with respect to immigration. They don't really have a powerful counter message. The Republicans are unified in screeching and propagandizing Americans about open borders. They say that Joe Biden opened the border under his presidency. They said that about Obama too. They said that about Bill Clinton, even though they also point out that those guys, Obama and Clinton, talked about, oh, we should enforce the border. So it's like, which is it? They contradict themselves, but they say Biden opened the border even though he kept in place a bunch of Trump's policies on the border, even though he tried to sign a bill which would have been very harsh on the border. And that bill was tanked because Trump was contacting Republican members of Congress and saying, hold your horses. You need to wait till I get into office because we need there to be a problem for me to complain about so that I can supposedly fix it when I come back into office. The only way for the Republicans to seemingly lose the thing on immigration right now, because the Democrats are so weak, is for them to go too far in violating due process, too far in trashing the US Constitution. And it's a shame. It's a shame that the Democrats don't have more of a spine. I'm glad that they have a spine with respect to healthcare. I'm glad that they're pointing out that the Republicans want to take away your healthcare. You know, they use some draconian terms, and it's totally fair. You know, they'll say, hey, some leftists at least will say, oh, Republicans want people to die, Republicans want people to go bankrupt from medical bills. You know, that's harsh. It definitely is. It definitely makes people's blood boil. It's incendiary language, but it's not totally inaccurate. It's inflammatory, but it's supposed to get people riled up. You gotta rile up your base. You gotta get them ready to go to the polls. The Republicans riled up their base with respect to immigration. They said, oh, be mad about this open border. Be mad about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating people's pet cats and dogs. So the Republicans are standing with their backs against the wall on healthcare, and Democrats are doing an all right job with their messaging. An all right job, but they could do better. Cory Booker, in his 25-hour-long filibuster, talked about healthcare a good bit. I think he could have hammered it a bit more. Bernie Sanders is obviously talking a big game on healthcare and just corruption in general, how big pharma, how the health insurance companies buy our politicians. That's a big problem. We need to talk about how specifically the Republicans have nothing to offer on healthcare, and how their talking points are so shallow. The best that they've got is they say, we're going to make America healthy again. And look at RFK Jr. in this shirtless picture of him. Look at those abs. He's so jacked. Imagine if every American were like this. By the way, ignore the fact that he just swam in raw sewage in Washington, D.C. with his grandchildren. Great role model he is. So yeah, they have nothing to offer on healthcare. That is the conclusion of this video. And that is the weak spot that we need to focus on, that progressives, centrists who are against the Republicans need to focus on. In the 2018 midterms, one thing that was a pretty helpful campaign issue for the Democrats was actually the idea of the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, and how certain governors, if they were elected, would accept that expansion, and certain other governors would say, no, I don't want it, it's bad, Obama bad, the ACA bad, it's socialism. So it was a life or death issue for some Americans. It was a serious economic issue for some Americans. Obviously, for the affluent Americans, it was not that much of an issue, if at all. But Democrats successfully took that issue and put it into the mainstream. They made people talk about it, they made people think about it, and it was pretty helpful in the 2018 midterms. The Democrats had a bad Senate map to deal with, and they have a bad Senate map to deal with in 2026, by the way. But they retook the House, which was pretty darn cool. They won some governorships that we didn't expect them to win in 2018. I think there was actually the one in Kansas, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a pretty cool deal. That's a pretty cool deal. When healthcare gets put into the forefront, you can swing some traditionally Republican voters. You can get them to change their minds. You can get them to say, yeah, no, I'm going to be a little bit lefty on this issue, you know, even though I'm not a progressive and even though I'm a fairly conservative guy. And you know what? They're entitled to that. They're entitled to say they are conservative with the exception of the issue on healthcare, because political ideologies work in mysterious ways. Politics makes for strange bedfellows. Yeah, we share beds with people on certain issues that we don't normally share beds with them on. But yeah, it's an interesting setup, and I think the Democrats can speak more to healthcare again in 2026 to really hammer these people. Obviously, there are plenty of grave constitutional violations going on. Things that do resonate with people. They do resonate with people. But do they directly affect their pocketbooks? Do they directly affect their ability to simply make ends meet? Not necessarily, not for the time being, you know. Violations of due process are egregious, and violating one person's due process is a threat to every other person's due process. Make no mistake about that. But people do feel pain in their wallets. People pay attention to that stuff, and people will vote based on it. Sometimes people don't act totally rationally. Sometimes they say, oh, I'm not doing as well. There's a Democrat in office, so it must be the Democrats' fault, and it must mean that the Republicans have the answers. That's not totally rational, but I mean, they're not going to say, oh, we'll do more of the same, you know, even though that might be the answer. It might be. You know, centrist Democrats don't seem like they're more of the answer necessarily. We need people who are willing to speak a more populist message on economics, a more anti-big business, anti-insurance company, anti-donor class message Like, okay, no, look, come on. The healthcare should be something that is off the table of the private market. It should be something that we use for our people to make our people better, not just, oh, we got to think about how the insurance companies feel about this. The insurance companies donate a hell of a lot to my campaign, and I got to make sure that I appease them. No, none of that. They don't say that out loud, by the way, but it's something that's always going on in the background. It is. So Democrats are not perfect on healthcare. They still take plenty of money from Big Pharma, and that is very cringe. It's very cringe of those Democrats to take money from Big Pharma, and Republicans, unfortunately, use that as ammunition against them at times. Of course, they have no leg to stand on. I think Cory Booker takes a lot of Big Pharma money, so yeah, it's kind of a bad look for him, but Republicans are even worse in that regard because they don't support any remotely good solutions on the healthcare front. They don't pay attention to any of the disastrous consequences of their policies. Education's important, but education's not necessarily life or death. Student loan debts, those are bad. Those are real awful. But medical debt is a whole different beast. And yeah, I think people are gonna see that the healthcare system needs a revamp in 2026. Tim Walz is talking about this. He's like, it's not enough to just say, let's reform the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was a rather mild step in the right direction in most ways, but it's not enough. People are looking for something more. Obama campaigned on more than just the Affordable Care Act in 2008. That's all we got, that you had people like Joe Lieberman, moderates in the Senate, who were kind of holding him back. Who knows what type of beasts could have been unleashed if Democrats were a bit more serious. But the fact of the matter is we got something more mild and more milquetoast than Obama and the Democrats campaigned on. We just did. Bill Clinton tried to pass universal health care, I believe in 93 or 94. That didn't happen. And when it failed, it actually hurt his approval ratings a lot. Yeah, he was pretty embarrassed by that. But now people are more passionate. Now the era of neoliberalism and the era of, incremental reforms are the way to go. We don't want to shoot too hard. That era does seem to be coming to an end, if not already at an end. So Democrats, it's something to pay attention to. Republicans have nothing left on the issue of healthcare. You have them dead to rights. You are backing them against the wall. Their hands are up. They are waving the white flag. On abortion, they can talk a tougher game about supposedly saving the lives of babies. But on healthcare, oh my goodness, they are left as stuttering messes. Just completely deer in headlights. They have nothing to offer. They will not protect your pre-existing conditions. They simply won't. They will get rid of that. They will not make it easier for you to get health care. Repeat that till the cows come home. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. This has been The More the Merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.